Mets baseball is back, and even though the games didn't count, it was good to see some of our favorite players back on the television set. Seeing Jeff McNeil, Pete Alonso, Michael Conforto, players like that. And it was a split squad game, so the Mets had two games today. One in their home park, Port St. Lucie, now named Clover Park. Changed the name a million times. I don't know why, but that's just something that they continue to do. Maybe it's for money reasons. We know how much the Mets love their money. The other game was in Jupiter against the St. Louis Cardinals. And in the Cardinals game, the Mets lost. And in the game at home against the Marlins, the Mets lost. So it is two losses, but obviously these games do not count. And it's more so how they played and more importantly how the main guys played. And I think it's important to know that the Mets, the 3 runs they got, it was very early. But it was all done by the regulars. That's really important. I mean, you want the production to come from the guys who are actually going to be out there. In this first spring training game, you're definitely not going to see all of the best Mets players. And even the fill-ins, for the most part, are guys that probably don't even make the AAA roster or maybe even stay in the organization. I mean, this is like the back of the back bench. This is as far as low on the depth chart as you could possibly go with some of the names. You probably can't even pronounce them, and you can't even recognize these guys. But still, again, it is just good to see, even though the games don't count and they call it spring training, doesn't feel like spring wearing a sweatshirt here in New York because we know how much different it is the weather down there in Port St. Lucie. Even though it was rather cold there, I mean, you saw the wind, and that definitely played a big factor. I thought it was interesting watching guys like Jake Marisnick and Michael Conforto. Conforto and Marisnick, they're trying to navigate all these difficult fly balls out there due to the wind, and then you saw the Marlins players having trouble. The ball that was dropped to center field on Pete Alonso's fly ball that allowed him to reach base, and Michael Conforto follows up with the hit, and Wilson Ramos drives in 2 of them with a hit, and Matt Adams with the sacrifice fly. And you know what? When you looked at the lineup today and you saw McNeil batting first and Alonso second, Conforto third, Ramos fourth, then you saw Matt Adams fifth, all of a sudden the lineup, as far as the production and the quality offensive players, it definitely had a big drop-off. And that's how it goes sometimes, especially in a game like this. But then you see Jake Marisnick, you had Jimenez, you had Parker, and then you had Max Moroff, who really, I mean, he bobbled a couple balls at second base, struck out in 2 of his 3 plate appearances. So I don't think he's a guy that we're going to see at any point on the Major League roster. He kind of was just there to fill in. Because since the Mets did have the split squad game, they had some of their other regulars playing down at Jupiter because, I mean, some of the fans, maybe they wanted to see the Jupiter game against the Cardinals. Instead, Marcus Stroman was on the mound. And that's where you saw Rosario, even though he was DHing, you saw Eduardo Nunez over there, Luis Guillorme. So those are the Major League players. I mean, those are the guys that's going to be on the roster and not more off. You know what I mean? So again, it definitely is tricky these first couple of games trying to evaluate them because you aren't necessarily seeing the best product out there. But what was interesting for the Mets was that Rick Porcello was on the mound. And that's really important because here's one of the guys that was brought in. He is now filling in for pretty much Zach Wheeler. And there's been this idea that him and Michael Wacha and even Steven Matz are kind of battling for those final 2 spots in the rotation. I still firmly believe that Rick Porcello will be in the rotation come opening day when the regular season starts. I don't think that's something that they're going to have to talk about unless, even if he's absolutely brutal, I still just don't really see what else they could do. Like, what's the other option? You're going to put Rick Porcello in the bullpen? I just don't really think that's productive. I don't think he kind of suits that role. The thing that Porcello does well is that he is an innings eater. He's not a guy that is going to have a great ERA. I mean, there's a high chance that his ERA is going to be in the 4s this season. And that's kind of what you have to expect. But you know what? Getting innings is really important, especially for a team like the Mets, who struggled so much with the bullpen, because one of the things that I was really critical of last year was the 5-inning pitcher thing, especially with somebody like Noah Syndergaard, where you had Syndergaard getting 5 innings, sometimes at most. The expectation for Jason Vargas is that you would be happy if he got 5 innings. Even if his pitch count is low, it's like, oh my gosh, we got 5 innings out of Vargas. He's not that great, so the fact that we were able to get this much out of him, we'll take it. And then Steven Matz, I mean, he'll give you 5-6 innings. But when you put together a string of 5 innings, 5 innings, 5 innings, it means that the bullpen has to do a lot of work. And baseball is a very long season, and we know for a fact that the same relievers are not going to be out there every day. So you're going to have guys that are resting, and then Lugo won't be available, or Diaz or Familia won't be available. So you have to go to these other minor league relievers. Who knows? Maybe somebody like a Chasen Shreve who really struggled in this game, or you have to go to a Daniel Zamora, or a Paul Sewald, or a Drew Gagnon, or a Chris Flexen. You know, like stuff like that is going to happen during the course of the regular season. Because, like I said, these guys need their rest, and you don't necessarily have as much depth as you would like. I still think this Mets bullpen does need to be better. I don't think it's as simple as plugging in Dellin Betances and expecting him to completely change the narrative, making the Mets bullpen one of the worst to at least halfway decent. I don't really think you could do that just with the signing of one guy. And there also is risk with Dellin Betances because he is coming off such a major injury, like an Achilles injury. He is also now in his 30s, and we don't know if he's going to perform as a Met, which is something that you never really know if that's going to go through. The other thing about Betances that's a little concerning is that he is a guy that can lose his command from time to time, and he could have some familiar-like outings where he can't find the strike zone. And with this new 3-batter minimum rule, that could end up being a problem when the Mets find themselves in close games, and they're just going to be nice where Dellin Betances does not have it. So I do think that having Rick Porcello go deeper into games, it will help because then, maybe it's another day that Betances is available or Lugo is available. Even though he gives up a few runs, he's going to give up, 3, 4 runs, 5 runs. Luckily, you think that this Met offense would be kind of able to handle that when you have guys like McNeil and Alonso and all these quality offensive players that could score a lot of runs, so they'll be able to match up with that. But then once they get the lead, it's all about being able to hang on to that lead. And I think that it was encouraging that after Porcello came out, we saw Shreve. He did not pitch well. I don't think he's going to be on the Major League roster either. Maybe at some point he's going to get called up, again, for depth purposes, whether there's an injury or some craziness going on. There is a chance that Shreve will be on this roster from time to time, especially when the rosters extend later on in the season. But didn't look great, and one of the things is that they were saying that he is a crossover lefty, that he can get right-handed batters out. Didn't really show that in this game. He served up that home run to Harold Ramirez, which was an absolute bomb despite all the different wind and all the craziness going on there. But still, it's just like he does need to be better than that because with this 3-batter minimum rule, he is going to be facing right-handers. So it's not like you're going to bring Shreve in for one batter. It's not really going to work like that. You would like to see him be better because, honestly, he is probably one of their better pieces. Because the other thing about the Mets, they don't have quality arms they could go to in the minor leagues. I've talked about all the time. When I do all these different minor league relievers popping up, I'm being serious because that shows you the lack of depth the Mets have at the pitching, especially when it comes to the bullpen. The fact that we have to see these guys so often every year, it's a problem. And you know what? Chasen Shreve didn't necessarily put together the best showcase for himself to be on this roster. Corey Oswalt looked good, throwing 2 scoreless innings, so that's encouraging. Oswalt was probably the best option for the Mets when he did have to fill in for the spot starts. That's something that the Mets have also been very lucky with. They've had a lot of health at the starting rotation, and for the most part have been able to get the starts out of their main guys, not had to go to too many different options. And with the times that they had to use different pitchers, the guy that did the best, and isn't really that much of a compliment because how bad all the other guys were, Corey also did an okay job in a few games. At least he got them some innings, and he kept the game relatively close. And he did do a good job today in his 2 scoreless innings. And then Daniel Zamora, he also threw a scoreless inning. That's important for Zamora because, like Shreve, Zamora's role is going to change if he is going to be on the Major League roster, which I feel like he might be because it's probably going to be a battle between him and Shreve because ideally you wouldn't mind having another left-hander in the bullpen because you have Justin Wilson, but I feel like if Familia and Diaz are really bad again, Justin Wilson found himself as the second best Mets reliever by default, where he was setting up games and sometimes closing games. And now with the 3-batter minimum rule, he's not really going to be a left-handed specialist anymore. Wilson might have to pitch late in games no matter who is batting, whether it's a left-hander or a right-hander. That just might have to be his role. So if you do want to kind of have a lefty specialist, which again, I don't really know how that's going to work this year, you're just going to need really good pitchers. I think that's something that I've talked about a lot. But now with this 3-batter minimum rule, it's so important that it's like just have good pitchers out there. I felt far too often the Mets would go to somebody like Sean Gilmore just because he is left-handed and the hitter isn't as good against lefties as they are righties. And it's just like, even though the pitcher is bad, they think that, oh, well, because this guy's bad against all lefties, it's going to work. And that never really happened. They would still get crushed by a Bryce Harper or Freddie Freeman or whatever other left-hander the Mets would be facing. So I felt that they found themselves in that situation way too much. That was not really the right calculation or analytically driven move. So I do think that having these left-handers be able to get the right-handers out, that's going to be really important. Again, if they want to be on this Major League roster, if the Mets want to show improvement in their bullpen, that's the kind of things that are going to have to happen. There's going to have to be a lot of improvement from within because other than Dellin Betances, the Mets didn't make any major bullpen moves. I do think that re-signing Brad Brock, that is good because Brock had some good moments, obviously much better than all the minor league relievers in the second half. I know they said he changed his arm slot, which I don't know if he had to do it. If that helps, great. If it makes him worse, that's a problem because then he has to go back to the original arm slot. So you never really know what's going on there. But one thing that it reminds me of is that, to me, I always think that Conforto changes his stance. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but it looked like his stance was slightly different today. I felt like his hands were a little more out, away from his body compared to more close to his body originally. I know for a fact Conforto's changed his stance from when he first got up. Luckily, he still has that same sweet stroke. That's the most important thing. As long as he still has that really pretty left-handed swing, which everybody loves so much, and I do like it too. We know that Michael Conforto has a very nice swing. But it's just like you have to be swinging at the right things and making contact. And I liked that when McNeil got his opposite field hit, which was really encouraging in the first inning. I like seeing Jeff McNeil go to the opposite field. The Marlins were playing a pull shift on him, which I thought was fascinating. I said it before, but I believe that Jeff McNeil was pulling too much in the second half. You definitely saw his power numbers increase as far as home runs, but his average went down significantly, which I thought was a problem. I think the best version of the Mets, when Jeff McNeil is battling for a batting title, I think that is a guy that you really want to have on your team, because it's just like getting on base is so important when you have an inconsistent offense and you have all or nothing hitters, which I kind of feel like Michael Conforto is. You want guys that are consistently reliable, constantly getting on base, so that you still have these opportunities to score runs, even if it isn't via the home run ball or a base hit, even if it's getting a ground ball or a sacrifice fly or an error, which is exactly what happened, because this is what the Mets have to do if they want to be a winning team. Jeff McNeil hits the opposite field, hits the left field. Pete Alonso batting right after him. Pete Alonso hits a fly ball to center field. It was a routine out. No question about it. Jeff McNeil's running back to first base. Was thinking about tagging up. Not sure if that would have worked, because Harrison from the Marlins hit the center fielder. He has a really good arm. Whether it's accurate or not, it wasn't accurate when McNeil was running to second base, nor when Michael Conforto was trying to score on Matt Adams' sacrifice fly later on. But to get back to Alonso, the fact that he just hit the ball, it caused the error in center field because the wind wasn't good and the way the sun was shining and all these different crazy things going on. That's important because there are going to be crazy weather days out there, especially in New York. We know that. Again, wearing the sweatshirt when it's spring training. But still, it's just like, as long as you're putting the ball in play, then you can let the elements kind of dictate what's going to happen. And there will be errors in the outfield. That does happen. Sometimes it's the lights. You know what I mean? You never know. But you just have to put the ball in play just to let something happen. And that's exactly what they did, because if Pete Alonso struck out, then all of a sudden Jeff McNeil doesn't move up a base and Pete Alonso doesn't move over a base. Then when Michael Conforto gets the hit, Jeff McNeil isn't as far. Pete Alonso isn't on base. So it's less runs that you have. Just because Alonso put the ball in play, even though it looked like it was going to be a routine flyout, the Mets got another run out of that. And they got another run because Jeff McNeil was on base getting an opposite field hit, not trying to, get pull happy. Even though he took a crazy swing at the first pitch, he took a crazy swing at a 3-0 pitch later on in the game in his second at-bat. So I just think that it's like building the right habits. That's what you have to look for in these spring training games, because you see the final score of 5-3, the Mets lost, and it's like, oh my gosh, how could the Mets lose to the Marlins? That's inexcusable. The Marlins are rebuilding. They don't have a very good team. Oh, it's going to be a bad year for the Mets. Like, that isn't the way to look at it. Did the guys that are going to be on this Major League roster play the way that they should have? Are they going to build winning habits? I've talked about it with the Nets recently, building winning habits, trying to have a team style that increases chances of winning. That's really important. You have to do things that it's like, okay, well, it didn't work this time, but if we keep doing it, it will work, because that's the type of way to win games. That's the way you do it. And for the Mets, I think that putting the ball in play is just going to be extremely important. I talk about it all the time, but it's something that they have to keep doing, because there are going to be times like they had in that September stretch. I go back to it a lot because I thought it was really important when they faced the Braves and they faced the Cubs and they pressed, they got pull happy. They were over swinging. They weren't swinging at the right pitch. They weren't getting on base. Weren't taking the ball the opposite field. That ended up being a problem for them. It would really kind of hurt their chances, because they're trying to make this miraculous comeback in the second half. And when you go on a big losing streak like that, when they lost both of those series, it makes it really hard to gain ground and really stay in the race and make a chance to get into that final wild card spot. But I do like that Wilson Ramos, he had the ground rule double with the bases loaded. That was encouraging. What I didn't like was in the first inning, Wilson Ramos, he dropped 2 routine pitches that Rick Porcello threw to him. Harrison stole 2 bases on Ramos. He threw a runner out later on. That was good. We still know the defense is not great, and I tweeted about it, but Wilson Ramos, he's just a tricky guy because his offense is great. Seeing Wilson Ramos go to the opposite field, getting that ground rule double, that was very nice, so you know what he's capable of offensively. But again, you don't love the defense, so you just have to hope that Ramos' offense outweighs his defense. You also know that Ramos does not have any speed. I talked about it a lot last year, but the idea of maybe carrying a third catcher, maybe every now and then going to a pinch runner for Wilson Ramos, and the Mets, they can't really do that because, with Jake Marisnick, he's another guy I want to talk about, because that's your one speed guy, but you have to use it at the right period of time. It's just like, if you don't really have another catcher, I know sometimes Mets managers, at least Mickey Callaway, he didn't want to do it because he thought that, oh, well, you know what, if my backup catcher gets hurt, then I don't have a catcher. You know what I mean? Like, that's the way that he viewed it. So he wouldn't ever pinch run for Ramos, even though it would have helped. And he had his crazy analytic, the 92%, whatever the number was. It doesn't make an outcome. Even though it does, you can see that, like, getting that extra base is always so important, because instead of going to second base, you went first or third. You scored on a sacrifice fly where Ramos would have just had to stay at third base, and you just get that extra run. Like I talked about the Alonso's fly ball, you get that extra run. And when you're in these close games and you just missed the playoffs by a couple of games, you need another run here or there just to get you over the top. And that's exactly what could happen for the Mets if they made these little moves like a pinch runner. And I think for Jake Marisnick, he made a pretty good catch in center field where we saw Harrison drop it for the Marlins. Marisnick was able to make a tough catch in center field where the lights and the wind was bothering him. He still held on to it, and that's important because that's the only thing he's out there is for defense. And Marisnick, he had one hit in this game. It barely got across home plate. A little tapper. Luckily, Marisnick's speed gave him that hit. I really don't think that Jake Marisnick is going to have a big impact on this team. I'm not crazy about that signing. It's unfortunate that Jake Marisnick is in here just because of how bad the center field defense is for the Mets, and it has been for a really long time now, because they still have not been able to get that true two-way center fielder ever since Carlos Beltran left over 10 years ago now. You know what I mean? Like, the Mets have not been able to fill in for that void because Lagares, he couldn't hit. The Mets, they've had Michael Conforto play center field. He's not a traditional center fielder. Curtis Granderson has been out there. He's not a traditional center fielder. Same goes for Cespedes and Brandon Nimmo. Those are all corner outfielders that, by design, are in center field. You already know you have problems at catcher defensively with Wilson Ramos there. If J.D. Davis is in left field, he's out of position. If McNeil's in the outfield, he's out of position. So you have a lot of guys that aren't really in the right position. Cano's range at second base is kind of compromised. Rosario is inconsistent at shortstop. And Alonso, he was supposed to be a bad defender. Turned out to be pretty good. He still makes his mistakes. So you know this is not going to be a very good defensive team. And that's the only reason Marisnick is here. But I still believe that even though Marisnick is out here for his defense, because of the way baseball works and players need rest or they come out injured. We saw Brandon Nimmo get hit with a pitch in the Jupiter game, even though he's okay. Every now and then, Marisnick is going to have to fill in, and he's going to get a lot of at-bats. Whether you like it or not, he's going to get at-bats. And unfortunately, he isn't going to get any hits. So he's going to be a hole in the lineup, which he pretty much was in this game, because you saw a drastic drop-off where after it was Matt Adams, then you have Jake Marisnick, and it's just like, okay, the offense is gone. Like, it was just very interesting to me that the first 2 innings of this game took almost an hour. Compared to the rest of the game, it flew right by. Like, the third inning was like 10 minutes, because when you have these guys, Marisnick and Jimenez and Jared Parker and Moroff, these guys were easy outs, and they weren't putting together competitive at-bats. They weren't getting on base. So they made the game fly right along, and the Mets weren't able to really build off that. And this game was 3-3 going all the way into the 8th inning, where I think the name is Yusita. He blew the game in the 8th inning, and, the Mets lost. And again, it's not so much the final score. It's more so the performance. And Porcello, he gave up 1 run. Marcus Stroman, he gave up 1 run, a solo home run to Tyler O'Neill of the Cardinals. The Mets didn't score any runs in the other game for Jupiter. And J.D. Davis, he got a hit, so that was encouraging just to see that J.D. Davis, I'm not saying that he's going to build off of last season, but just that he still can hit the ball. That's a good development, that he still hits balls in 2020. That's encouraging. Brandon Nimmo, he struck out, but also he got hit by a pitch, which is a Brandon Nimmo special. Rosario went 0 for 3. Dom Smith went 0 for 2 with 2 strikeouts. I want to talk about him right now, because seeing Matt Adams get the sacrifice fly and just Matt Adams being on this team, I still think it was a very odd signing. I know Matt Adams has power. He hit 20 home runs last year. He was with the Nationals, and we saw plenty of him. But I believe that Matt Adams, he's not a good defensive first baseman, and he's not going to play anywhere else. And Dom Smith, he's going to play first base, and if he even does play, it would be mostly at first base where you have Pete Alonso, so he isn't going to be there much. The only other spot for Dom Smith is left field, which he isn't great there either. So again, we talk about not having good defense. So I don't understand what they're going to do there. That is a position battle. I don't even know. Does Dom Smith go to the minor leagues? I don't love that. I feel like if you're going to put Dom Smith in the minor leagues anyway, you might as well trade him to get something you need, whether it is another catcher or it is more pitching depth. You definitely need more pitching depth. Or maybe it's depth in another position. Maybe get another traditional center fielder and hope that they could provide some kind of spark on offense. I do think the Mets do need more pitchers. So that's going to be really fascinating to see what happens there. And Dom Smith going over 2 strikeouts. Again, it's spring training. I'm not going to go crazy, but not exactly the right first step, you could say. Eduardo Nunez, he went 0 for 2. He's not going to give you much offense either. Guillorme 0 for 2. So it was a rough game in Jupiter. So at least on TV, we got to see the Port St. Lucie game, which definitely the first inning, it was exciting. It reminded you of the Mets of last year a little bit, because I like that Conforto kind of went opposite field a little bit too when he hit the ball in the center field. Instead of trying to hit the home run, just take the base hit. I think if Michael Conforto can take the base hit more often, especially with the spot he's going to be batting in the lineup. Michael Conforto is going to be batting in the middle of the lineup where he's going to have runners on. So if McNeil is on base, or Nimmo, or Rosario, or Alonso, or Cespedes, like, Conforto needs to work on driving those guys in. Michael Conforto far too often only drives himself in with solo home runs. So I think that if he could just learn to take the base hit more often and just use that sweet swing to his benefit, and take his pitches, take his walk more often, which he walks plenty. That's something that you don't really want to criticize him too much. But I think just these little improvements like this, little tweaks, that Michael Conforto could be an even better player. And that's why I've been so hard on him, is that I know he is capable of more. Some guys like Marisnik, I know he's not a very good hitter. And I'm going to be mad that the Mets were cheap and they decided to take a bad hitter in Marisnik. I'm going to be very critical of him this season. But still, it's just like you saw Ramos get the hit, so it was encouraging. It was exciting. And again, at least it is Mets baseball. At least we got to see something. Win or loss, doesn't matter. As long as everybody's healthy, that is extremely important. And as long as the regulars don't look awful, that's really important as well. I hope it's just something you could build on. The next one will be tomorrow. Steven Matz is going to be on the mound, so I will be there to recap that. But until then, enjoy your day.